You have no idea how different your life will look 1 year from now. Carl Jung observed that the psyche keeps its own calendar, and it rarely consults the ego before turning the page. Here is where I want to begin, because it is honest, and because it is Jung's own word on the matter, as he wrote in his essay on the stages of life, collected in Volume 8 of his collected works, paragraph 784. We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning, for what was great in the morning will be little at evening, and what in the morning was true will at evening have become a lie. Sit with that for a moment, because Jung is not being poetic here. He is describing a mechanism, the plans you made when you were 25, the identity you built when you were 30, the rules you set for yourself when you were desperate to be taken seriously. Those were morning tools, built for morning light, and if you are still trying to run your current life on that old program, the friction you feel is not you failing. It is the afternoon of your life quietly refusing the morning's instructions. That is why you cannot see next year clearly. You are trying to predict an afternoon using a morning map. So let me tell you honestly where I stand with this tonight. I do not know exactly what my life will look like 1 year from now, and for a long time that uncertainty felt like failure to me. Like I was behind, like everyone else had a 5-year plan, and I only had a fog. But I am starting to understand that the fog is not absence. The fog is the sign that something in me is still forming, still becoming, and has not finished its work. I stopped demanding that the plan I made years ago govern the life I am living today. I let the parts of me that were never allowed to speak start speaking, even if I do not yet know where they are leading me. Say it with me. I make the unconscious conscious, and again, I make the unconscious conscious. If this kind of thinking is good company for you tonight, stay close by subscribing, so that tomorrow's teaching has a way of finding you. And if something in what I just said made you go quiet for even a second, type the 2 words "face it" in the comments below. Just those 2 words, nothing more. Let them be your seal. The first key is this. The reason you have no idea how different your life will look 1 year from now is that the ego is not the author of that story. The ego believes it is in charge. The ego draws up 5-year plans and vision boards and New Year resolutions, and then wonders why the actual turns of its life keep arriving sideways. From a diagnosis, a door closing, a face reappearing after years of silence. Jung would say you are looking for the wrong author. The deeper organizing center of the psyche, what he called the self, keeps a longer and stranger plan than the ego can read from where it sits. Imagine a man who has scheduled his entire next decade, the promotion, the house, the timeline for children, and then one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, he sits in his car in a parking lot and simply cannot make himself walk into the office. Nothing dramatic happens. No one fires him, no one leaves him, but something in him has quietly stopped agreeing to the schedule. That is not breakdown. That is the self beginning to edit a manuscript the ego thought was already finished. You have felt a smaller version of this, the plan that suddenly bores you, the goal you finally reach and feel nothing. That flatness is not a flaw in you. It is information. It is the psyche telling you the morning program has expired, even though the calendar still says morning. Notice how this shows up in smaller ways too. The vacation you planned for a year that leaves you strangely hollow the moment you arrive. The promotion you campaigned for that tastes like ash within a month. The ego drew up an itinerary, and the self simply declined to attend. Think of the ego here as a ship's captain who has charted a course by the stars he learned to read as a young sailor, confident, capable, certain of his bearings, while beneath the deck, unseen, the currents themselves are shifting. The captain is not incompetent. He is simply not the one who moves the water. You have likely lived a version of this only in the last few days, a plan for the weekend that dissolved into something better you did not choose, a conversation you dreaded that turned, without your engineering it, into the most honest exchange you have had in months. None of that came from the ego's chart. This is why you cannot picture next year with any accuracy. You are trying to forecast weather being written by a mind you do not fully have access to yet. And once you know that, the not knowing stops being frightening and starts being honest. I stop mistaking the ego's plan for the whole story. The second key is this. Most of what feels like your personality is actually a morning program, and programs are meant to expire. Think about the rules you absorbed early. Work harder than everyone else, and you will finally be safe. Never need anyone, and you will never be disappointed. Keep the peace at all costs, and you will be loved. Those rules were not stupid. They were often exactly what a younger version of you needed to survive a particular house, a particular set of parents, a particular unfair playground. But Jung noticed that the very attitude which serves you at 20 can become the very obstacle blocking you at 45. The discipline that built your career can be the same discipline that now refuses to let you rest. The self-sufficiency that got you through a hard childhood can be the same wall keeping your marriage cold. This is not a moral failing. It is simply a program running past its intended season. Picture a map drawn for a country that no longer exists on those exact lines. The roads you memorized as a child are still on the paper, but the towns have moved, the rivers have shifted their banks, and yet you keep consulting the same folded creases out of pure habit, not because the terrain still matches, only because the map is familiar, and familiar has always felt like safe. Imagine a woman who learned as a girl that being endlessly agreeable was the price of belonging in her house, so she became the one who never made a fuss, the one who smoothed things over, the one everyone could bring their disappointment to, without fear of resistance. This served her beautifully at 9. At 19, it still earned her friends. At 35, it is quietly costing her a marriage where her own preferences have not been spoken aloud in years. And then, one Tuesday, for no dramatic reason at all, she cancels a commitment she did not want to keep, and feels her whole chest loosen. That is not a small moment. That is a clause in the old contract finally being read out loud and questioned. Here is where people get it wrong. They hear about midlife change and think of it as a crisis that strikes at a certain age. That phrase, midlife crisis, is not Jung's. It comes from a later writer named Elliot Jakes in the 1960s. And the popular slogan that life begins at 40 belongs to an author named Walter Pitkin, not to Jung at all. Jung's actual observation is quieter and more exact. He said we cannot live the afternoon according to the program of the morning. It is not a single crisis at a fixed age. It is a mismatch that can announce itself at 30 or at 60 or, quietly, on an ordinary Tuesday. The moment the old rule stops fitting the current shape of your life, picture someone auditing their own morning program the way you would audit an old contract, reading each clause out loud. Does this rule still serve me, or am I still obeying it out of habit? The ones you cannot answer easily are usually the ones worth rewriting. You have no idea how different your life will look 1 year from now, precisely because you have not yet seen which of these old clauses you are about to finally set down. I lay down the program that no longer fits the day I am living. The third key is this. The unlived life does not disappear just because you outran it. It waits, and eventually it presents its bill. Jung experienced this in the most concrete way in his own life. In his late 30s, by his own account in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he went through a period so disorienting that he seriously questioned his own stability, all the security of his professional identity. Doctor, husband, respected voice in a young movement, seemed to give way beneath him, and what he discovered, slowly and without a map, was that parts of himself he had never been permitted to live, the parts that were curious about images, about fantasy, about the interior world, rather than only the clinical one, had been waiting the entire time, quietly, for permission. Notice the word he uses, waiting, not attacking, not punishing, waiting, the way something you owe someone waits patiently in a drawer you have chosen not to open. It does not knock loudly at first. It simply remains, gathering a kind of quiet interest. And now imagine, alongside that, a different kind of life entirely. A businessman who spent 30 years building a company, measuring every year by growth, by numbers going up, by being needed, and then he retires, and within 18 months, he is unrecognizable to his own family. Not because retirement is inherently dangerous, but because the entire architecture of his identity had been built on being useful in one narrow way, and the moment that structure was removed, there was nothing underneath it he had ever gotten to know. The unlived capacity for stillness, for relationship without performance, for simple presence, all of it had been postponed for 30 years in favor of the morning program. And now, unbidden, uninvited, it was demanding to be lived. This is what Jung meant by the unlived life returning as a demand. It is not punishment. It is closer to an appointment you forgot you had made with yourself. And here is the part that is easy to miss. The appointment does not care that you are busy. It does not care that the timing is inconvenient. It simply arrives, the way a bill arrives on the date printed on it, regardless of whether you have the money ready. Consider a smaller and quieter version of the same man. Imagine someone who loved to sing as a boy, who was told, gently but firmly, that singing was not a serious use of his time, and who built instead a life of spreadsheets and sensible decisions, and who, at 44, driving home from an unremarkable day, hears an old song on the radio and has to pull the car over because he is weeping and cannot say why. That is not an overreaction. That is 30 years of unlived sound finally finding a door left open a crack. Let us walk through an ordinary week, the way this shows up quietly before it ever becomes dramatic. Monday, you notice a strange restlessness during a meeting you used to enjoy. Tuesday, you catch yourself staring at an old photograph longer than you meant to. Wednesday, a friend mentions a hobby you gave up decades ago, and something in your chest tightens. Thursday, you find yourself irritated at your own routine for no clear reason. Friday, you dream something strange and dismiss it before breakfast. None of these on their own look like anything, but together, they are the unlived life knocking, softly, at a door you have not opened in years. Pause for a moment and ask yourself honestly which day of that week you have already lived this month. This is precisely why you cannot picture next year accurately, because whatever is waiting behind that door has not yet been let in. And once it is, the shape of your days will not resemble the shape they have now. I stop postponing the parts of me I have not yet lived. The fourth key is this: the word individuation. The word Jung used for this whole process literally means becoming undivided, coming to selfhood, becoming what he called an individual. A person no longer split down the middle between the part they show and the part they have exiled. Imagine a woman who has spent 20 years being the reliable one at work, the one who never cracks, never complains, never asks anyone for help, and one ordinary Sunday afternoon she finds herself crying over a dish breaking in the sink, something so small it embarrasses her, and she cannot explain why. That is not a breakdown, that is the exiled half of her, the tired one, the one who has needed care for years, finally knocking on a door the capable one learned to keep locked. This matters here, because the very fact that you cannot predict your next year is often proof that a division inside you is beginning to close. When you were more divided, your life was more predictable, because you were only ever going to keep enforcing the same split, the same persona kept polished, the same unlived material kept exiled. Predictability, in that sense, is sometimes just another word for a wound left untouched. Now look at it from the other direction. Think of a man who has always been the funny one, the light one, the one who diffuses every hard conversation with a joke, and then one Tuesday the joke will not come, the words simply refuse to arrive, and underneath that silence sits a grief he never once let himself feel. That gap in his usual performance is not a failure of charm, it is the serious half of him quietly asking for a seat at the table he has never set for it. This is what integration actually looks like from the inside. Rarely a dramatic reveal, more often a small unscripted moment where the part you exiled interrupts the part you perform. But the moment the two halves of you begin moving toward each other, the capable one and the tender one, the disciplined one and the playful one, the one who achieves and the one who simply wants to rest, the future stops being a straight line and becomes something closer to weather, alive, and slightly beyond forecast. This is not chaos. This is integration in progress. and integration always looks unpredictable from the inside while it is happening. Only afterward, looking back, does it look like it was leading somewhere all along. Think for a moment about your own week. The sentence you said without planning to say it, the pull you felt towards something you had long dismissed as beneath you, the old irritation that softened for no clear reason. None of that is random. It is the seam between your two halves quietly closing a little further. You do not have to orch. The fifth key is this, and I want to walk through it slowly, in several parts, because it is the center of everything Jung meant by individuation, and it is the real reason you have no idea how different your life will look 1 year from now. First, consider that individuation is not a straight climb. Jung described coming to selfhood as a lifelong process of the personality becoming more fully what it already potentially is. It is not becoming someone new, it is becoming the one you already were, underneath the morning program. And this process does not run on a timetable the ego can read in advance. It runs on the timetable of what needs to be integrated next, which is why people who ask me how long individuation takes are asking the wrong question entirely. It takes as long as it takes, and it reveals its next chapter only once the current one has actually been lived. Not skimmed, not managed, lived. Imagine keeping a journal every January where you write down, in detail, exactly what you expect the year ahead to hold, the job you expect to still have, the relationships you expect to feel the same in, the mood you expect to be carrying. And imagine reading that journal back each December. Most years, the page from January reads like a letter from a stranger. Not because you failed to plan carefully enough, but because the thing doing the actual living was never only the planner. Something underneath the planner was also awake the entire time, quietly rearranging the furniture of your life while the planner slept. Second, consider what this means for prediction itself. You cannot accurately predict your life 1 year from now because prediction assumes the variables are already known. But the whole nature of individuation is that it works with material you have not yet met, a talent you have not yet tried, a fear you have not yet faced directly, a relationship pattern still unexamined. Each of these, once it surfaces and is actually engaged rather than avoided, changes the entire shape of what is possible next. This is not mysticism. It is simply honest about how much of you remains, even now, still unconscious, still unmet. Picture a woman who has spent years certain she is not a creative person. She has said this about herself so many times, it has become a fact in her own mouth. And then one ordinary evening, half by accident, she picks up a pencil while waiting for a kettle to boil, and something in her hand moves in a way that surprises her. That single evening was not on any 5-year plan she ever wrote, and yet 6 months later, it has quietly become one of the load-bearing walls of her week. The parts of you not yet in the room cannot be factored into any plan you make today, and that is precisely why the plan keeps needing to be redrawn, not because you are careless, but because you are still, mercifully, unfinished. Third, and this is the part I want you to actually sit with, rather than simply hear, this means the unpredictability you may have spent years resenting in your own life, the plans that fell through, the versions of yourself that did not survive contact with reality, the timeline that never once went the way you drew it at 22. None of that was proof you were doing life wrong. It was proof that something in you was still alive enough to be edited. A life that never surprises you is often a life still running entirely on the morning program, never questioned, never revised. So when you look back at the years that felt most chaotic, most off-script, ask honestly whether those were also, quietly, the years something in you was finally becoming more whole. Fourth, consider how ordinary this looks while it is actually happening. It rarely arrives as a thunderclap. It arrives the way weather changes, a small shift in pressure you only notice afterward. You agree to a conversation you would have avoided last year. You feel a pull towards silence where you used to reach for noise. You find yourself unable to keep pretending a certain agreement in your life is comfortable. None of these are headline events, and yet each one is the self quietly filing a small revision into a manuscript the ego assumed was finished. This is the turn I want to make with you directly, because until now, we have been speaking of a woman with a pencil, a journal read back in December, composite lives held at a comfortable distance. But this key is not about them, it is about you. Specifically, this week, think of the small, unpredictable thing that happened to you recently. The conversation that went somewhere you did not expect. The wave of feeling that arrived without warning. The sudden pull towards something you had long dismissed as unimportant. That small unpredictability was not noise. It may have been the self quietly at work, revising a chapter the ego had already considered closed. Pause for a moment now, and pick one real moment from the last few weeks where your life did something you did not plan, and ask yourself honestly, was that a mistake, or was that the beginning of a correction? Jung would say the tension you feel between the plan you had and the life that is actually arriving is not a problem to be solved quickly. The greatest and most important problems of life, he wrote, can never be solved. They can only be outgrown. You do not out-argue this tension. You live long enough inside it that you grow past the size that made it a problem in the first place. And when you do, you look back, and the very unpredictability that once frightened you looks, in hindsight, like the exact shape mercy took in your life. Think once more of that January journal, and imagine reading every entry from every year of your life laid end to end. What you would see is not a straight road at all. It is something closer to a slow spiral, returning again and again to the same handful of questions. Who am I when no one is watching? What have I not yet allowed myself to become? And each time the spiral turns, it turns at a slightly different depth. That depth is not visible from inside any single year. It is only visible from far enough back, which is exactly why you cannot see it now, standing where you are standing. I stop treating the unpredictable turns of my life as evidence I have failed, and I start treating them as evidence I am still becoming. The sixth key is this: the not knowing you feel about next year is not a gap in your competence. It is a sign of life still in motion. A life that could be fully predicted a year out is very often a life that has quietly stopped growing. The seed does not know in advance exactly which direction its root will bend around the stone it meets underground, and yet it grows anyway, trusting a process it cannot fully see. And I want you to notice how this actually plays out in an ordinary life. Imagine someone who keeps a tidy 5-year plan taped inside a kitchen cabinet, promotion by this date, house by that one, and every evening they glance at it the way you might check a clock, and for years the glancing brings comfort, because the plan feels like proof that the future is under control. Then one evening they open the cabinet and the plan simply looks foreign to them. Not wrong exactly, just written by someone they no longer fully recognize, and they stand there a little stunned, because nothing dramatic caused this. No crisis, no loss, only the slow arithmetic of a person quietly continuing to grow past the paper that was meant to hold them. That moment at the cabinet is not failure, it is the doorway this key keeps pointing to. Dim, unfinished but never empty. Think of it this way too. Imagine arriving late at night in a city you have never visited, the curtains already drawn, and you fall asleep without once seeing the view. In the morning you wake and for a moment, you do not open them. You simply lie there, knowing that whatever is out there has been true the whole night. Whether you looked at it or not, mountains or rooftops or a quiet grey harbour, none of it depended on your watching to become real. Your life 1 year from now is a little like that view behind the curtain, already forming in some sense, already becoming whatever it is becoming, while you go on living your ordinary days without the proof in hand. This is why I said at the very start that you have no idea how different your life will look 1 year from now, and I want you to hear that now, not as a warning, but almost as a small mercy, because it means the ending has not been written down yet, where only your oldest fears can read it. It means the version of you frightened tonight does not get the final word. Consider too how quickly this shows up in small, ordinary hours. You wake already rehearsing tomorrow's meeting. You go through your day fairly certain you know how the week will resolve, and then a phone call arrives you did not expect, or a stranger says one plain sentence that stays with you longer than it should, and something in the architecture of the week quietly shifts. You did not plan for that call. And yet by evening, you can feel it has already begun rearranging what next month might hold. That is not chaos interrupting your life. That is your life, doing what it has always done, working just beneath the level you can consciously track. Think of a river that has cut the same course for years, and then one spring, without asking anyone's permission, a fallen tree upstream sends it curving a few feet to the left. The water is still the same water, still moving toward the same sea, only the bend is new, and no map drawn the season before could have shown it. So tonight, before you close your eyes, let yourself hold the not knowing a little differently than you have before, not as a fog you must burn off with more planning, not as a failure of foresight, but as the quiet evidence that the deeper organizing center of you is still awake, still working, still capable of surprising the very self that thinks it already knows how. Here is the whole picture. The ego drafts a plan, but the self keeps the real calendar. The morning program that once served you quietly expires and asks to be laid down. The unlived life waits patiently and eventually presents its bill. The two halves of you moving back toward each other is what makes the future feel like weather instead of a straight line. The very unpredictability you feared was never proof of failure. It was proof that something in you was still alive enough to be revised. And the not knowing you feel about the year ahead is not an absence. It is a doorway with the light still low, but the room clearly not empty. All 6 of these were never 6 separate teachings. They were 6 turns of one single key. The recognition that you are not finished, and that being unfinished was never the problem. It was always, quietly, the point. I make the unconscious conscious. One more time, gently, I make the unconscious conscious. And so tonight, I will not ask you to picture your life exactly 1 year from now. I will only ask you to notice that you cannot, and to let that not knowing feel, for once, less like fear and more like a door someone left slightly open on your behalf. What will you find when you finally walk through it